Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about the Day of Reckoning card. And this truly was a great card. It actually was debatably the best card of the whole year. And when I say the best card, I'm not necessarily talking about the best fight that was on it, because when you talk about the best individual fights or the most anticipated individual fight, that probably was either Gervonta Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia or Terrence Bud Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade also was up there for me. Canelo versus Jamal Charlo as well, but that fight pretty much ended up going how I thought it was going to go because, like I had always said, I never seen Jamal Charlo as an A-plus level fighter like many of some of these other guys tried to promote him to be. But it is what it is. But anyways, there's been a lot of great fights that have happened this year. And I don't know of any other boxing matches that are going to occur this year, at least that I know of. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do much these past few weeks just because I've been a little bit sick. And there's been some other stuff going on as well, such as my bachelor's degree program and our stuff as well. And I had to get that done. But anyways, there was a lot of great fighters on this card, a lot of very good matchups on this card. Of course, I have to talk a little bit about some of the main events before that of the two main events with that of Wilder and Anthony Joshua. So we'll kind of get into that. And I'm not really sure if I'm going to make this into a separate video or if I'm just going to conjoin the two. I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. But anyways, whenever it comes to Dimitri Bivol versus Lyndon Arthur, that fight pretty much went down how I thought it was going to go, with Dimitri Bivol pretty much whooping his ass. Dimitri Bivol is at the very least the second best light heavyweight in the world. In my view, he's one of the top 10 pound for pound fighters on earth. There's no doubt about it. Jarrell Big Baby Miller versus Danny Dubois. I think that I predicted Danny Dubois to win that fight. I would have not been surprised had Big Baby Miller ended up winning that fight just because of the pressure and the size of him, and I don't find Danny Dubois to be the most multi-dimensional fighter. However, coming in at 333 pounds, or however much he weighed, that man really should be embarrassed. I mean, he's been caught on steroids a multitude of times, so maybe he just let himself go, and he hadn't been fighting professionally really in about 5 years, so I get it. But to come in at 333 pounds, I mean, there's bodybuilders that don't come in that heavy. Ronnie Coleman, during his prime, I don't think overall was 333 pounds. There was a lot of blubber. There was a lot of fat on Jarrell Big Baby Miller. He also was never the most multi-dimensional fighter. And in order to win certain fights in his career, he would have to usually out-pressure and outweigh his opponents and usually just wear them down over time. Well, when you don't have that level of stamina anymore, and then on top of that, you weren't that multi-dimensional of a fighter in the first place, you're going to get what you got against that of Danny Dubois. And I just don't see Jarrell Big Baby Miller coming back anytime soon, unfortunately, because of his steroid usage. And a lot of these other fighters are probably on something as well. But whatever ended up happening, he ended up getting caught not just once, but several different times, I believe, during his career. So the consequences ended up eventually coming back and biting him right in the ass. It just is what it is. But enough about those two fights, because those two fights, what happened, during those fights, I pretty much expected that. However, excuse me, there was at least two surprises for me overall within these cards. That was the Deontay Wilder fight and also the Anthony Joshua fight. And what ended up happening that surprised me a little bit, and there's been a lot of surprises that have happened this year. And the reason why that is, guys, the reason why there's been so many surprises, even for me this year, someone that usually ends up getting my predictions correct, is because you never know what's truly going to happen when you finally get in the ring with that guy that could potentially challenge you in a different way than most other fighters ever could. That's why Stephon Fulton, even though I predicted him to beat Naoya Inoue didn't just beat Stephon Fulton, which I wasn't really surprised about that he beat him, because I always thought that matchup was 50-50. But Naoya Inoue ended up completely crumbling Stephon Fulton within that fight. It was very particularly interesting. And then, of course, you had Teofimo Lopez that kind of surprised me and ended up, getting after Josh Taylor. David Benavidez getting Demetrius Andrade didn't surprise me, but the fact that he did it within 6 rounds did. Terrence Bud Crawford just beating the shit out of Errol Spence Jr., that probably debatably was the biggest surprise or shock for me this year. But another shock or another surprise is that Joseph Parker, and once again, I already stated in my my fight predictions, that had Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua lost their respective fights, today, I would have not been shocked. I gave Joseph Parker I think about a 30% chance to win this fight. And I think I gave Otto Wallin about a 40% chance to beat that of Anthony Joshua, or maybe about a 30% chance. But if you would have told me that Joseph Parker not only would have beat Deontay Wilder, but pretty much won 12 rounds to 0, or at the very least won 10 rounds to 2, if you would have told me that, I would have I would have not believed you. And that's pretty much what ended up happening. Excuse me. But anyways, in this video, we're going to review a video by that of Mr. AKHi TV. We all know that Deontay Wilder was one of the main protected assets and main protected fighters of the LDBC and new media. And they now realize that Deontay Wilder's career is over. They now realize that it's over. And once again, I'm not a person that roots against anybody. I don't have a horse in any race in particular. That doesn't mean necessarily that I don't root for certain fighters necessarily, or that I don't have certain favorite fighters that I like to watch. But like I said, I don't like to be a fanboy of any of this because that ruins my logic and objectivity. But these guys, they're rooting very hard for Deontay Wilder throughout these past 10 plus years, or throughout this past decade, because they wanted him to be the best heavyweight in the world. But the question is now about Deontay Wilder, the fact that he didn't just lose this fight, but that he lost it so easily and really so dominantly. And that in most of the times, Deontay Wilder really looked even more one-dimensional than what he had prior when it came down to it. Excuse me. What does this mean really about Deontay Wilder's career? And like I said, in my view, it was more important for Deontay Wilder to win this fight than what it was for Anthony Joshua to win his respective fights. And the reason why that was is because had Deontay Wilder ended up losing this fight, he would have looked as the biggest hype job in the heavyweight division probably of all time. Is he that, or is he a fighter that maybe just isn't quite the same? I'm going to talk about that. Let's tune in. Let's see what Mr. AKHi TV has to say.
Congratulations to Joseph Parker for taking Deontay Wilder to school, winning every single round on the judges' scorecards. Leading up to the fight, I was wondering why Wilder accepted to fight Joseph Parker ahead of an Anthony Joshua mega fight. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me because stylistically, this fight was a nightmare for Deontay Wilder. This fight is actually 20 to 30 times more difficult stylistically than an Anthony Joshua fight for Deontay Wilder.
Is it really? Is it really 20 to 30 times more difficult? And the way that Anthony Joshua ended up looking in the main event. You know what I also find funny? You take a look at all these channels, Boxing Eagle, AKHi TV. They all talk about the Deontay Wilder fight, but they don't even have the respect to talk about Anthony Joshua or go throughout the stream. Once Deontay Wilder ended up losing, they ended their stream. That just goes to show you what their main objective was. They were hoping that Wilder was going to win, and they were hoping that Anthony Joshua was going to lose. But the worst nightmare ended up happening. A fighter that was formerly beaten by that of Anthony Joshua didn't just beat Deontay Wilder, but he pretty much embarrassed him. He pretty much outboxed him. And keep in mind that Joseph Parker is not at the best point in time in his career. He ended up getting knocked out, I believe, last year against that of Joe Joyce. Keep that in mind. It could have even been earlier this year, but I think it was in 2022. Because I think Joe Joyce was busy fighting, Jean Ouellet, I believe, 2 times this year. And, of course, he ended up getting stopped. Right now, I'm not even sure if Joseph Parker is a top 10 heavyweight anymore, at least before this fight. Because he had been replaced by certain guys like that of Joe Joyce, Filip Pergovic, Zhang Ouellet. Or, excuse me, I don't think that that's his name, actually. I think I'm talking about the UFC fighter's name. But whoever, Big Zhang, that one Chinese fighter that, of course, ended up knocking out that of Joe Joyce, that one fighter, who pretty much is built like a monster. So, once again, and of course when I say that, I'm talking about just a very big, very girthy guy, and a guy that's going to be some trouble, even with his older age, to some of the fighters in that heavyweight division. He had been replaced by some of the fighters like that, and Joseph Parker not only crawls back into the top 10 with this win, but he could possibly have some big fights ahead of him. He could have an Anthony Joshua rematch. He could have an Andrew Ruiz rematch. He could have some other fights there. But, I just thought that I would say that because keep in mind, certain people will say that Deontay Wilder was shot for this fight. And what I'll say is this. I'm not sure if Deontay Wilder was the exact same fighter in this fight. It's hard to tell whether Deontay Wilder really is the biggest hype job in heavyweight history, or if he just wasn't necessarily the same fighter after that of Tyson Fury. because he had never really stepped in the ring with anyone else other than that of Tyson Fury and Luis Ortiz. And that's why when I had certain guys on my channel a few years ago claiming that, oh, you're crazy, Deontay Wilder is top 10 pound per pound, how can you claim that someone like Deontay Wilder is top 10 pound per pound? And then these are the same guys that were complaining that Vasily Lomachenko was number 1 pound per pound or top 10 pound per pound. At least with Vasily Lomachenko, whether you agree with his pound per pound ranking or not, you can claim that you know all the guys that he's fighting. With Deontay Wilder, it's like, other than that of Luis Ortiz and Tyson Fury, who did he ever really fight? You know, like that, Dominic Breazeale and, Artur Spiltzka and, all these other guys. Like, I'm sorry, but none of those guys are great fighters. Bermain Stavern, like, none of those guys are great fighters. None of those fighters, I'm not sure, are even on the same level as Joseph Parker. And after taking a look at that fight, I think that you can certainly come to the conclusion that not only had Anthony Joshua always had the better resume than Deontay Wilder, but he had fought tougher tests that could have potentially beat Deontay Wilder. You could at least possibly come to that conclusion, unless you want to come to the conclusion that Deontay Wilder was just a completely shot fighter tonight. I'll say this. I'm not sure if I would say that Wilder is completely shot. Do I think that he's the exact same fighter that he once was? No. I didn't see the same level of confidence from Deontay Wilder. I didn't see the same level of pizzazz from Deontay Wilder. And the thing is about Deontay Wilder is right now, at 38 years old, he's trying to adjust with his technical ability and be more skilled. And to be honest with you, it really would have just been better for him to return back to his old ways. Because when you're 38 years old and you're trying to get back into the title picture and get a big fight with that of AJ Anthony Joshua or whoever you might be, you might as well overall do whatever brought you to the ball or to the dance in the first place. Because are you really going to learn that much more with your style? The thing that makes Deontay Wilder great is not his boxing ability. It never has been his boxing ability. It's been his pure, raw power and athleticism, his great heart and his great belief in himself. And on top of that, his great charisma in the ring and his great versatility. And when I say versatility, or, perhaps that's not the right word, but, just really great toughness, and mental toughness. That's what's always made Deontay Wilder dangerous. It would be like George Foreman if all of a sudden he tried to be more like Muhammad Ali. That's just not going to work. So in a way, I did not see the same fighter that I once did, because I don't think that he really was doing the correct things for himself. And some people might say, what are you talking about? He's trying to improve his skill set. Right, but there's just some times where you pretty much just have to fight the way that you're going to fight, and that's the best way that you're going to win. You're not going to be able to do certain things that other guys are able to do. And Deontay Wilder, unfortunately, he's never going to be able to do what Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk, he's never going to be able to do what they're going to do. Excuse me. It's kind of like that. If we were to watch an NBA game, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, what he has to do, when it comes down to it, is that if he ever is going to win an NBA Finals, he has to know what makes him great. He has to get on the inside. Yeah, sure, he can shoot a little bit of mid-range, and that's always going to help. Maybe even a couple of threes here and there. But if he tries to play like Steph Curry, and goes to the outside range or mid-range a whole lot, or Kevin Durant, that's not going to work, because that's not his game. And that's the thing about Deontay Wilder. He played this fight completely wrong. I think he was trying to make better adjustments, and I'm always, for one, trying to improve themselves. But sometimes you got to realize what got you there. And I think Wilder, after the Fury fights, I think that he's completely in a daze. I think that he's completely lost. And I think that, of course, it took a lot out of him.
Even though, ironically, Joseph Parker lost to the undefeated version of Anthony Joshua. However, since then, Joseph Parker got better, while Anthony Joshua got worse. One thing...
Did Joseph Parker really get better? And if you're trying to allege that Joseph Parker right now is better than that of Anthony Joshua, keep in mind that Anthony Joshua just knocked out Otto Wallin, who gave Tyson Fury a very tough fight. He made him quit, I believe, after 4 or 5 rounds. That's what Anthony Joshua did, okay? That's what Anthony Joshua was able to do. Joseph Parker got stopped by Joe Joyce, okay? A guy who recently got stopped twice this year. He got stopped and brutalized in that fight just a year ago, okay? So let's keep that in mind.
About Joseph Parker is that he can take his opponent's best weapon away, such as Deontay Wilder's right hand. He can nullify that due to the fact Joseph Parker is mobile. He's not stiff or robotic like Anthony Joshua, where Deontay Wilder could land a punch. more.
He's not stiff like Anthony Joshua, and he does move more. And I understand AKHi TV's side if he's saying that this would be a little bit more of a dangerous matchup. I get it to a degree. But Joseph Parker, a lot of the times also, sometimes can be a little bit too cautious for his own good. That was a big worry of mine. But the reason why Joseph Parker was able to get away with it is because Wilder just wasn't throwing anything at all in this fight. And really, if you take a look at Deontay Wilder and some of the other fights, if he's uncomfortable, he's not really the biggest thrower. It's just that eventually he knew that he was going to catch you. If you take a look at Deontay Wilder against Gerald Washington, he was losing pretty much every single round before he ended up getting the knockout. He wasn't throwing a lot of punches there. If you take a look at him against Luis Ortiz, he really was losing both of those fights until that right hand landed. If you take a look even at the first Tyson Fury fight, he was very intimidated by Fury's size and his wildness, his wiliness. By his intelligence in the boxing ring. He was very intimidated by all those fighters. But he knew eventually that potentially he could have that chance at the right hand. But once it got to the second half of the fight, and Wilder tried to adjust a little bit, but it was just too little too late.
Importantly, Joseph Parker has great defense.
Joseph Parker has never had great defense. He has never had great defense. Don't let AKHi TV tell you that bullshit. Now, what I will say is that Joseph Parker, this is the best defensively that I have ever seen him. Joseph Parker has never had great defense. Don't let him tell you that bullshit. That's a clear indication that he has never watched Joseph Parker before this. Because for those of you that have ever seen Joseph Parker before this, and I know that I'm going to get a lot of people that are against me here, Joseph Parker has a notorious bad habit of never keeping his hands up consistently. Now, he did do that in this fight, so I give him a lot of credit there. This probably defensively was the best that I had ever seen Joseph Parker ever look. But if you take a look at him against Dillian White, if you take a look at him against Joe Joyce, if you take a look at him against some of those other fighters, he is notorious for not keeping his hands up. So no, Joseph Parker has never been a great defensive fighter, but he looked great defensively against Deontay Wilder. But that's really the question once again. Does this really mean that Deontay Wilder is the biggest hype job in heavyweight history? Or does it mean that Deontay wasn't the same fighter? To be honest, I think that it's a little bit of a mix of both.
You have a heavyweight that's heavier than Wilder, with great defense and great footwork, with skills. That's already a nightmare for Deontay Wilder all day, every day. On top of all of that, Joseph Parker could take a punch. He has an iron chin. However,
he can take a punch, but he was knocked out just a year ago by Joe Joyce. So why don't you talk about that?
Wilder really barely landed tonight. And that's because his jab was non-existent. Because
Wilder has never had a great jab. Once again, I keep telling people this. Don't get me wrong. He's never had a bad jab, and at his best, he does have a good jab. And I do think that his lack of throwing, I think that it was because those Tyson Fury fights, they just took a lot out of him. I don't think that Wilder was the exact same fighter here. But it's not like Deontay Wilder has ever had a Larry Holmes type of jab or a Tyson Fury type of jab. He's never had that type of jab. And that's why in both of those Tyson Fury fights, they were talking about all this bullshit about, Fury, clearly he's cheating with all this other shit. Fury has never been a pillow puncher. And if you take a look at Fury with his lead hand jab, he was forcing Deontay Wilder's head back the whole entire time. Which, by the way, would make no fucking sense if Tyson Fury really had his hand lower into the glove. But for those of you that remember all those stupid bullshit excuses, you know what I'm talking about.
Couldn't land a jab. How you expect him to land a right hand? Now, the problem here is Wilder didn't even try to land the jab first. You can't set up the right hand before you set up a jab to land. Really, a lot of what Wilder is doing in the gym, he's not executing with that when he's in the boxing ring, in an actual fight, which credit to that goes to Joseph.
Right, and you know why that is? Because your opponent actually hits back. They move. They're able to hit you with counters. That's why people always say that, that you can do all that shit on the heavy bag, but can you do that shit in the ring? That's why, when they took a look at Deontay Wilder and they looked at him, for the Tyson Fury trilogy, and they're like, oh, he's doing all this other shit. I wasn't really impressed by that because I knew that as soon as Tyson Fury was mainly going to land against Deontay Wilder, that it wasn't mainly going to change. because Deontay Wilder is not a guy that adjusts super well. He has a plan A. He has to fight in that type of style, and if he doesn't fight in that type of style, he's going to lose. It is what it is. He has never been an exceptional boxer. He never has been. It would be like Rolly Romero trying to outbox someone like Gervonta Tank Davis. You're not going to win that way. If someone like Rolly Romero tried to outbox someone like Gervonta Tank Davis, not only would he eventually get stopped, but he would get completely embarrassed. He wouldn't even win a single round. The only reason why Romero was competing with that of Gervonta Tank Davis is because he's doing what he knows. Now, is that ever going to be successful against an elite caliber level champion? Probably not. But that's Rolly Romero. That's his style. And it's the same thing with Deontay Wilder. To a degree, I understand making adjustments, but dude, Joseph Parker probably was not the type of opponent overall to do that against, especially all 12 rounds. He had to really be aggressive. He had to really use his size and his reach. And I was a little bit surprised that he barely threw anything, But Deontay Wilder has also been a little bit like that in the past when he's been uncomfortable.
Parker, his skill, his counterpunching ability was the reason why Wilder wasn't able to land anything, along with his footwork, so on and so forth. But even if Wilder was worried about Joseph Parker counters, he could still throw a snappy jab from a distance that Joseph Parker can't counter him at. Since Wilder is taller and has longer reach, therefore, there's multiple ways you could approach that situation. But clearly, all Wilder tried to do was land a haymaker right hand without setting it up. Nevertheless, congratulations to Joseph Parker. This was an impressive win. Hopefully, we get to see him against the likes of Usyk and Tyson Fury next, if it's possible.
He's not going to beat either Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk. He's not going to beat the best version of either of those fighters. And I know a lot of people, they may potentially disagree. They may say, well, he just got the biggest win of his career. He did get the biggest win of his career, but it appears that Wilder was a very great style for him to fight. And on top of that, Deontay Wilder, he just never was a super exceptionally skilled fighter in the first place. Now, I wonder if a lot of these channels, if they're going to start calling Deontay Wilder a hype job. The same way that they called Gennady Golovkin, the same way that they called Vasily Lomachenko, the same way that they called Canelo Alvarez, Fury. Are they going to call Deontay Wilder, a guy that really has, that the biggest win of his career is over Luis Ortiz? Are they going to start calling him a hype job? Highly doubt it.
With that being stated, drop your thoughts in the comment section below.
But anyways, that's pretty much it about my thoughts for this fight. Of course, the next fight that I have to talk about is going to be that of the AJ Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin fights. I might find a video for that, or I might just talk about it here. I'm not really sure, but I think I'm going to try to find a video for that. We'll see what ends up happening for that. But anyways, this is pretty much my opinions about the Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker fight. Very impressive performance by Joseph Parker. Very disappointing performance by that of Deontay Wilder if you were expecting him to win. Or, if you're a Wilder fan. Once again, I'm not a fan of any of these fighters. But once again, a very good win for Joseph Parker. Clearly the biggest win of his career. And once again, this begs the question, is Wilder really that overrated as a heavyweight? Has he really been always that majorly overrated? Or was he clearly just a different fighter? In my view, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it speaks volumes to the fact that Fury really changed him as a fighter, probably for the worse. And then on top of that, I also think that he's always had a lot of holes in his game. And who knows, maybe even prime v prime with both of these fighters. Maybe Parker could have done the complete same thing. The thing is about Wilder is that there's going to be accusations that go both ways, and it's really hard to argue any of them because we don't really know what's going to end. We don't really know what's happening there because Deontay Wilder never really fought anyone during his prime. So that's really the problem. It's kind of like that of the Mike Tyson syndrome. Like a lot of people will say, oh, Mike Tyson, during his better years, he would have beat Evander Holyfield and beat Lennox Lewis. We can say that all we want to, but it's kind of hard to say that because Mike Tyson during his prime, he was beating guys like Trevor Berbick and, Peter McNeely and, Peter McNeely was probably when he was a little bit more one-dimensional as a fighter. But, he was beating guys like, Pinkelton, Thomas, and, all this other stuff. Fighters that, sure, they may have been champions, Frank Bruno, but none of them elite, So it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this little review here. I got to go review that of the Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin fight. Let's get into that next. Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. Excuse me. Anyways, this is going to be, of course, my review of the AJ Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin fight. And I'm not really sure whether I'm going to make this into separate videos or or what. I think I'm just going to conjoin it maybe in one video, but we'll see about that. It could be separate videos. I'm not really sure. But anyways, just to kind of recap, the Dimitri Bivol fights, or the Dimitri Bivol fight against Lyndon Arthur, that fight pretty much went down exactly how I predicted. The Danny Dubois versus Jarrell Big Baby Miller fight, that fight pretty much went down how I predicted. The Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker fight was a bit of a surprise. But also the fight that was a bit of a surprise for me was also the Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallin fight. I was expecting a little bit more of a tougher fight between that of Anthony Joshua and Otto Wallin. And I think that I predicted that there was going to be a knockout in the Parker versus Wilder fight within about 6 or 7 rounds. And I predicted AJ to win by unanimous decision. Turns out that I should have had those switched around when it came down to it, because AJ was completely dominant within this fight, and I thought that he had looked the best ever since he had fought that of Kubrat Pulev. And, you didn't really know which versions of these fighters we were going to get, especially with Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, because they both had suffered multiple losses throughout their career now within the past couple of years. But one could debate that, one was kind of worse, or which one was kind of worse. Of course, Wilder ended up getting stopped a couple of times by that of Tyson Fury in very brutal fashion, especially within that of the third fight. But sometimes getting stopped can actually be a little bit better, or sometimes it ends up better than you getting completely outboxed. Because when you get completely outboxed by someone and you don't get stopped, it makes you kind of maybe a little bit more mentally think about, wow, this dude, he didn't have the power to stop me, and yet he still had enough power to kind of hurt me and completely outbox me throughout the whole entire time. He was able to keep me back. He hurt me a multitude of times, and on top of that, he completely exploited my skill set. At least with Deontay Wilder, he can say that, he pretty much fell on the shield in both of those fights. He tried his ass off, but, he just pretty much got his ass completely kicked. But obviously, at least when it came down to it, Deontay Wilder is in a worse place than what Anthony Joshua is. And that's actually not what I predicted. It appeared that Deontay Wilder, now of course we had a very small sample size because it was only against Robert Elenius, but it appeared that, it appeared that he was in a better place than that of AJ Anthony Joshua. And that's why I thought that Deontay Wilder possibly was going to look better than AJ Anthony Joshua. That's not what ended up happening at all. And I think that if you're Anthony Joshua, and the thing is about Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, they're never going to be the boxers that a Tyson Fury or an Alexander Usyk is. They're never going to be Lennox Lewis. They're never going to be a Muhammad Ali necessarily, but you could remember them potentially as A-grade level fighters. And Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, even though they have never fought, and now it looks possible or apparent that they may possibly never fight when it comes down to it, it's and they may never fight now, but AJ and Deontay Wilder, their names have been tied together now for the past several years. It's one of those fights to where it never happened, unfortunately, and right now it looks like it may never happen. But the question always was about both of these fighters, even after their losses, who was the better fighter? And of course, you had AJ fans or certain people debating that AJ Anthony Joshua was the better fighter. You had certain people debating that Deontay Wilder was the better fighter. And if you're an AJ fan or if you're someone on the Anthony Joshua side, you would have probably debated, as well as I would have debated, overall, not saying that, I'm a fan of any of these fighters, but if I were going to debate on AJ Anthony Joshua's side, I would say that he clearly has the better resume. He was almost a complete undisputed champion of that weight division, other than holding that of the WBC belt, and that he had wins over Andrew Ruiz, Joseph Parker, Vladimir Klitschko, I'm trying to think of who else, Alexander Povetkin, Kubrat Pulev, I'm trying to think of who else on that resume. Excuse me. And Dillian White as well. And there's a couple of other fighters that, I'm possibly forgetting. But the thing is about Anthony Joshua, you can say whatever you want to about him. But the thing is about AJ is that he has proved through and through that he at least is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I think that he's going to be remembered as an A-plus level fighter. I don't know if he'll ever be remembered as someone that's going to be the best heavyweight of his generation. I don't know if he's ever going to be remembered as a guy that clearly is the greatest of all time. But I think that AJ Anthony Joshua, when you take a look at his career, at least if it were to end today, I think that you clearly could give Anthony Joshua the respect that he could be a top 20 heavyweight of all time, at least somewhere around there. Because when we talk about the top 10 heavyweights of all time, we're talking about, at least in my view, we're talking about Muhammad Ali, Lennox Lewis, Rocky Marciano, maybe Joe Louis, probably Tyson Fury up there now, in my view, even though some people would disagree. I would have him up there. Larry Holmes debatably would be up there when it comes down to it. Mike Tyson maybe within that top 10 list. Evander Holyfield, maybe Riddick Bowe. There's some other heavyweights that perhaps, excuse me, I'm forgetting. And I'm not really talking about the super old timers like Jack Johnson or anything like that. I'm just talking about the ones that were pretty much from the 50s onwards. When it comes down to, and there might be some other heavyweights that I'm not thinking of. Maybe, Vladimir Klitschko, Vitaly Klitschko, of course, was great. But, we have to have a serious conversation about Anthony Joshua, at the very least, being a top 10, 20 heavyweight of all time. He's beaten a lot of champions throughout his career. He's beaten some very good names. I thought that he looked very dominant throughout this fight. And I don't think that there can be any doubt about it anymore. Almost kind of like that Messi versus Ronaldo conversation. Once Messi won the Copa America and the FIFA World Cup combined, I just don't think that there was an argument anymore for Ronaldo. At least in my mind, there isn't. When you talk about Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder, sure, Deontay Wilder has more knockouts and he has more fights on his record. But in my view, that actually kind of goes more against him, because when you take a look at it, Anthony Joshua was able to beat Joseph Parker when they were both at the best point in time in their career. And Deontay Wilder just got completely embarrassed by him. And Deontay Wilder, excuse me, my bad. But like I said, Deontay Wilder, the only fighter that he had ever fought other than Tyson Fury that was actually worth a damn was that of Luis Ortiz. And, the LDBC and the media and the Deontay Wilder fans, what they always tried to allege over that of AJ Anthony Joshua is that, Luis Ortiz is better than Joseph Parker and Dillian White and all these other guys. Well, is he really? Because Luis Ortiz, now to be fair, he was 47 years old when he fought Andrew Ruiz. He got knocked down like 3 times in that fight. Is Luis Ortiz a guy that ever truly would have beat Dillian White, Andrew Ruiz, and Joseph Parker? The truth is that we'll never know. And that's really the problem. But what we do know now is that Anthony Joshua, at least for at the moment, he has to be counted as a greater fighter than that of Deontay Wilder. He just has to be, because when you take a look at the accomplishments, it's really not that close. When you take a look at the resume, it's really not that close. Sure, certain fighters have certain losses over others, but the only argument that Deontay Wilder fans still had remaining that was left was that overall, that Anthony Joshua, that he had lost to Andrew Ruiz and Usyk, and Wilder wouldn't have lost to those guys. Well, now we're not quite so sure, because now he just lost to a Joseph Parker that has already lost 3 times in his career and ended up getting stopped in brutal fashion, I believe, just about a year ago. So that pretty much was the last remaining argument. Kind of like when you take a look at the Messi and Ronaldo argument, the only remaining argument that they had was that Messi had not won the Copa America, and that Ronaldo had won trophies in certain other areas. And that is a valid argument. That certainly was a valid argument. But then once Messi won the Copa America on top of winning the FIFA World Cup, which is probably the most prestigious award in all that of soccer, at least debatably, that conversation pretty much was put to bed. And I think that when you take a look at this Anthony Joshua, I think that this is probably the best version of him that I've seen ever since the Kubrat Pulev fight. And whatever, excuse me, my apologies. Still a little bit sick. But anyways, when it comes down to it, I think that this is the best version of Anthony Joshua that I have seen probably ever since that of the Kubrat Pulev fight. And like I said with Deontay Wilder, the very unfortunate thing is that he was trying to adjust a little bit as a fighter, and I think become better as a fighter in this fight. And in my view, it just was not the fight to do that. If you were going to do that, then you were going to have to fight another fight. Unfortunately for both Wilder and Anthony Joshua, they did not have the time. So both of their backs are really going to be up against the wall within these fights. So Deontay Wilder, he thought that it was the right time to try and adjust and do better things. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you're put in a very harsh place because people say you need to adjust, and then you try to adjust, and then you just can't win because people say, why did you do that? So I don't blame Deontay Wilder for what he did. I just don't think that it was the right approach. I think that at 38 years old, there's only going to be so much that you're going to be willing to improve on. And Anthony Joshua is a guy that, in my view, has a little bit more shelf life. He has a little bit more potential than that of Deontay Wilder. Because Wilder's a guy that pretty much is a slugger. And there's a reason why those guys, a lot of the times that they don't always last a whole lot, especially in some of their bigger fights. Now, some do, like George Foreman kind of did, but, he also took a little bit of a break, I believe, and, he beat Michael Moore, but then he pretty much got his ass kicked against some of the other guys. But the thing is that Anthony Joshua, one thing that I liked about him within this fight is that he returned back to his old ways, certain flaws and all. He got what got him to the dance in the first place, which is the fact that he's able to use that size, he's able to use that power. Now, maybe some may argue that Anthony Joshua had the more advantageous matchup because, he was a former sparring partner, Otto Wallin. However, one also could say that that is a little bit of a disadvantageous matchup because your sparring partner knows a lot of your moves and they know a lot of your adjustments. Of course, Anthony Joshua is now, I believe, with Derek James and a new trainer, or maybe he was with that one British coach. I can't really remember for this fight, but I thought he was with Derek James. If he's not, someone correct me about that. I can't really remember. But anyways, when it comes down to it, Anthony Joshua, he got back to whatever was working for him. Is he ever going to beat someone like a Usyk or someone like that of a Tyson Fury? In my view, probably not. I just think that those fighters are the creme de la creme. I think that they're the elites of the elites, and I just don't know, if he's ever going to defeat those guys. But at the very least, I have to give Anthony Joshua a lot of credit for showing a lot more confidence, for proving to the stage that he's still somewhat relevant and, that he's still a very good fighter. Now, the question is about Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. What really is next for both of them? And what did I see in terms of improvements from Anthony Joshua in this fight? I thought that his defense was a little bit better. I thought that when he had thrown certain counters that, his counters are even a little bit better. I thought that his boxing ability actually looked a little bit more sharpened and a little bit more polished within this fight. Once again, is he Tyson Fury? Is he Alexander Usyk? No, he's never going to be those guys, at least not in their best form. But when it comes down to, once again, I have to give him a lot of credit for this fight and for this performance. He did a great job. He did a great job. So I give him a lot of credit there. But anyways, once again, what is next for both that of Anthony Joshua and what is that next for that of Deontay Wilder? Well, for Anthony Joshua, he still probably is one of the top 5 heavyweights within the world right now. He could fight Filip Hrgović, which would be a very dangerous fight for Anthony Joshua and also Filip Hrgović. He could fight maybe that, of Zhang, or whatever his name is, the Chinese guy. He could fight, potentially Dillian White in a rematch. Who knows? He could fight a lot of guys. There's a lot of options out there. Anthony Joshua, I think, showed a lot of confidence within this fight. I think that if you're Anthony Joshua, that you have to hold your head high off of this performance. And unfortunately for Deontay Wilder, I don't really know what's next for him. He could try to get back on the horse. He could try to get back in the ring. But if he's going to do that, he's going to have to try to make slight adjustments, but really try to find that groove of what made him successful in the first place. And I just don't know if that's going to be possible after that of the Tyson Fury fights. I think that the Tyson Fury fights, that they really took a lot out of him. And I think that there's clearly more left within Anthony Joshua than there is within Deontay Wilder after taking a look at this fight, where before, I thought that perhaps maybe it could have been the opposite. So I have to give Anthony Joshua a lot of credit. The fights that I would like to see, I wouldn't mind a rematch with Joseph Parker. I wouldn't mind another match with Andy Ruiz. I wouldn't mind a match with Filip Hrgović. I think that, if I were going to pick a perfect fight for Anthony Joshua, I'm not really sure exactly what it would be. The Deontay Wilder fight maybe could happen, but I just don't know the major appeal of it. Deontay Wilder is pretty much done at this point in time in his career. And on top of that, Deontay Wilder, he's always a dangerous guy anyway. I just don't see the reason why Eddie Hearn or Anthony Joshua would really want to make that fight unless overall they were really trying to make some money or prove to see who truly is the better out of the two of them. I just don't see Eddie Hearn doing that. I think that he pretty much had a big, massive success on this day. I think that he can say, see, Deontay Wilder was always overrated. He couldn't even beat a Joseph Parker that was not the same anymore. And I think that if you're Eddie Hearn right now, in my personal view, that you pretty much take a win-win situation, and I think that you pretty much roll with it. That's what I think Eddie Hearn more than likely is going to do. I just don't see why they would want to fight Deontay Wilder when he just lost to a Joseph Parker that probably wasn't even looked at as a top 10 heavyweight anymore, or at least debatably. And then on top of that, Anthony Joshua looks great, and you want to step in the ring with Deontay Wilder, where that fight probably would make nowhere near as much money. And then on top of that, Wilder has the potential to beat anyone anyway because he still has that level of power. I just don't see that fight happening. But we'll see what ends up happening. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. you know. But they were talking about Filip Pergovic. They were talking about, you know, some other fighters there. You know, that would be very particularly interesting. I don't really know exactly who else he could fight. Of course, the Tyson Fury or Usyk fight is on the table. Maybe if AJ can win his next fight and whoever the winner of that fight is. But we'll see. We'll see. It's going to be very particularly interesting. Who knows? Maybe even a Francis Ngannou fight may be on the table. I'm not exactly sure. But anyways, a lot of credit overall goes to Anthony Joshua, all the fighters on this card. A lot of credit to Joseph Parker as well. Very unfortunate to see Deontay Wilder, kind of a diminished version of himself, but also kind of a version of himself that he's always been. So it is what it is. Anyways, so I just thought that I would talk about that. Those are my opinions on the fights. Very interesting card. Very interesting card. Liked the card. Loved the card in my view. Thought it was great. A lot of interesting things. Some surprises ended up happening today. But of course that happens in the sport of boxing. And that pretty much caps it off for this year. I'll have to eventually make my new top 10 pound for pound list for next year. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll talk to you all later.